Hello, welcome back. It is I, Anthony Mueller, the wine advocate reviewer for South Africa and Washington State. Thank you for joining me again this Wednesday afternoon at 1 p.m. Pacific time. I have a very, very awesome and geeky guest, Mr. Johan Reyneke, will be joining us momentarily from Reyneke Wines in South Africa, making some incredible, fantastic organic wines and biodynamic wines. We're going to get a little geeky when it comes to that discussion, but he's making some fantastic Cabernet, some fantastic Chenin Blanc, some Syrah, some Sauvignon Blanc, really, really great stuff. So let's see if we can get him in here. We see that he has just arrived. Hope everyone's having a fantastic... Sometimes you just have to jump. Hello, sir. How are you? You're good? Can you hear me?
Hey, how are you, man? Nice to see you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for joining me. I know it's late there, so thank you for staying up for us. It's 10 p.m. there, yes?
Yep, 10 p.m.
10
Almost
p.m.
bedtime.
Right. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining. I know that a lot has happened in 2020, and there's a lot of things going on. And you know, here it's in the fall, there it's in the spring. So you have some things to tend to in the vineyard as well. So for those of the viewers who aren't necessarily familiar with yourself, Johan, can you please give a brief background about yourself and your brand, Reyneke Wines?
Sure, man. So at this very moment, I'm obviously on the farm. I'm in Stellenbosch, which is southern tip of South Africa, which is the southern tip of Africa. And I'm about 10 kilometers from Stellenbosch proper in the Polkadry Hills, old decomposed granite soils. And it's dark outside now, but in the daytime, if you look sort of towards the south, you see the beautiful False Bay and Cape Point and Stellenbosch on the one side, and then Table Mountain and Cape Town on the other. And I've been living on this farm for almost 30 years now. I started working here as a student. I fell in love with it, and I'm making some organic and biodynamic wine here.
Fantastic. Awesome. So you've basically become a champion of organic and biodynamic wines and farming. In doing so, you've created different series from using different grapes. Take us through your organic range, your biodynamic range, your reserve and estate range for us, and ultimately what they mean to you and the brand.
Okay, so our organic range is known as the Reyneke range in the US, and it's sort of our more accessible and sort of fruit-driven wines, easier entry, good to drink in the first 3 to 5 years, really affordable. I think they retail for around about $14-15 US. But they still provide, I mean, beautiful wines, good quality, certified 100% organic and biodynamic, well, organic, I should say. And then the biodynamic wines is probably the signature of the farm. They're all estate wines. We focus on 4 cultivars: Cabernet, Syrah, Chenin Blanc, and Sauvignon Blanc. They're all wild yeast ferments, unadulterated, less is more, really have a sort of a sense of place and speak of the farm and who we are and how we live. And then we've got the reserve range. Those wines we don't necessarily release every year. They're wines that we only release in special vintages and typically in smaller quantities as well. So I believe it's one of those that we're going to be tasting later on and talk about more.
Awesome. And then your biodynamic range.
Yeah. Sorry, man. Anthony, I don't know. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Did you touch on your biodynamic range?
I did, yeah. I just had I said that the organic ones are a bit more accessible,
Gotcha.
fruit-driven, sandy soils, lower parts of the slope. The biodynamic ones are more serious wines, wines that one can keep for a decade or so, both the whites and the reds.
Gotcha.
They're truly beautiful. But what you can do is, if you look on our website, reynekewines.co.za, or if you go to our US importers, vineyardbrands.com, all the information and pictures of the labels of these wines are available, and you can find out more about them and have a look and see what they look like.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sorry. From my side, your picture's coming a little pixelated and grainy, and sometimes your audio's kind of cutting out. So I hope everyone can hear today. Awesome. So yeah, you we had a chance to connect when I was there last for official business, and you in fact were the very last in-person appointment before I literally got on the plane and traveled back home, spending the what was it, 32 hours of travel time. That's how I operate when I go for business. I left San Francisco, flew directly to where was it? It was Germany, so Frankfurt. From Frankfurt, I had a 7-hour layover and then didn't leave the airport, went directly down, flew into Cape Town, took an Uber from Cape Town Airport, went over to Stellenbosch, checked in my hotel, quickly took a shower, changed clothes, and went straight to tasting. And I tasted through about 75 wines after traveling for that 29 hours. Like that's how I do it. And it was kind of bittersweet when I was connecting with you because I really wanted to see the farm and see what you were all about. And meeting with you, I got this sense that you truly cared about the vineyard, about the people, about the grapes, about the earth. And these are all really important aspects to consider when considering the South African wine climate right now. Just because there's so many moving targets, and you seem to have your finger on the pulse of all of it, all the way through. And your wines clearly have that special little something that when you try them, you know that you've spent a lot of time, a lot of energy trying to get it right in the first place. So with that, I think we should just jump straight into the first little sip. We have the Reserve Cabernet, the 2015. This beautiful etched bottle. That's a sexy looking bottle, I'll tell you what. Yeah. And 2015 for the people who chase the vintages for Stellenbosch, 9, 15, 17. Those three for me always stand out. Would you agree?
I would absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely. I think it's spot on. 2015 was a great one for the record books. And what's really special about this Reserve Cab that we're going to try tonight is that in the 20 odd years that we've been making wine, we've only released a Reserve Cab on 4 occasions. So it really is a special wine and not one that we release every year. So it's a privilege to share it and drink it with you tonight. Cool. Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's a pleasure as well. I opened this now about 40 minutes ago. I've been letting it kind of breathe and open. And it's opening up beautifully. I remember I just looked up the score and looked at the notes, and I gave it 92 plus, and it's certainly earned that plus for sure. I mean, it's really opening up, and it's a really beautiful wine. So why don't you go ahead and just quickly talk about this wine, where it comes from, how you make it, the biodynamics behind it, and what ultimately makes this special to go into your Reserve line.
Okay, so it's interesting. I think, if I'm completely honest with you, Cabernet for us is probably one of the more challenging grapes we work with. Yeah. It tends to be sort of smaller clusters, smaller berries, thicker skins, and then if you add sort of really poor old granite soils, relatively high altitude, and then you bring in the natural competition of the plants that grow in the vineyard, the organic and the biodynamic way. You end up with smaller bunches and smaller berries and a lot of skin and less flesh. So this wine could be quite austere and tannic if one doesn't take special care. And the special care we take, I would say, starts in the vineyard. So we sucker it a bit differently. We prune it a bit differently. I show a bit of extra love, a bit of extra compost, perhaps a bit more vigorous with weed management. And then when the grapes come to cellar, we take great care to sort them twice, actually. So we sort the individual bunches on a sorting table, then we'll destem the berries, and we'll actually sort the individual berries as well. And then they'll ferment for roughly 3 weeks in open concrete fermenters. Wild yeast ferments, no additives whatsoever. So no yeast, no DAP, no tartaric acid, none of that. A little bit of sulfur, but not much. We're obviously limited by what we can add being organic. And then this wine basically goes to new 225-liter French oak barriques and stays there for 24 months, for 2 years. And in this specific instance, we selected 6 barrels that we thought were exceptional of that very special vintage. And this is the cab, and it's such an interesting wine, man. I'd like to hear, I'm the farmer, you're the pro. It would be nice to hear how you taste it and what you think. But I get amazing black currants, sort of berries, maybe even some peppery notes there, a bit of spice. And then you get that cedar wood and that graphite coming through. And on the palate, I always find it sort of remarkably fresh. It's got a freshness to it, a vitality, a liveliness to it that I absolutely love.
Yeah.
But yeah, what do you think?
Yeah. So like on the nose, it has this like that black currant note, as you said, but I get like this dusty plum skin as well. That's like really juicy, but it's not sweet. It's like more exactly as you said, fresh. It's like you've found that perfect time to harvest where you've captured all the freshness and it literally has ended up in the glass and it just emanates from the glass and it just is perfumed. It's slightly dusty. It has like this mineral tension, almost like if you've been working in the like on the ground and then you have dust on your hands, you kind of go like this, and then that final powder, it has that kind of that essence to it. There has this kind of dark cherry note to it as well. The pepper, I get more like white pepper. It's not like punchy, but it's more like soft and elegant. And then it hits the palate. And as you said, you use 100% new French oak on this, correct?
Yeah. For 24 months.
It doesn't feel like it. Where like when people say I use 100% French oak, a lot of people think, oh, it's just a 4x4 of wood and it's going to hit you on the face and that's all you get. Yeah. Everything has been seamlessly integrated, and what happens is that fruit and that juiciness has absorbed into that wood, and that oak expression comes out almost like, as you said, like this kind of cedary note, but it's you get the soft, subtle baking spices. It's not like oak in your face. It's more freshness of fruit and vibrancy, and then it has this long, silky finish with like energizing tannins that kind of grip, but then they kind of pull back in. The acidity here is very bright. You don't initially realize it until about 30 seconds after you've swallowed, and you can feel your salivary glands start to kick in and say, wow, there's some energy here. It's a really, really special wine. And then you look at it and you say, well, there's a lot of farming practices that went into why this tastes like that. I see the potential for concrete fermentations moving forward. There's been a few producers that I've spoken with in Washington that have been hesitant about doing Cabernet fermentations in concrete. But I think if they were to try this, they would be, I'm sure, thoroughly convinced that it can be done very, very well and end up a very high quality wine.
Awesome.
It's
That's beautifully put.
it's yeah, still very juicy, and it continues to evolve. I mean, I haven't taken a sip for probably a minute and a half, and I can still feel it has that persistence that I enjoy in wine. Tasting this wine,
I find it to be quite layered and sort of, it's almost like reading a book. It just reveals a new page after page as you spend a bit of time with it.
Exactly. When trying this wine, like you get the almost like the heat index from the heat units from the sun, where you can tell it's New World, where it has like this fresh vibrancy to it, but it also has this underlying kind of minerality that you may expect to find in the New World or in the Old World. And I think if you were to put this in front of someone and say, blind this wine, what is it? I think you're going to confuse people, because I think they'll pull out that it's Cabernet, but they won't know where to put it. Is this like Old World? Is this New World? And this wine kind of straddles the line of both, taking some of the best parts of the Old World and New World and synergizing them together into the glass. It's a really, really beautiful expression.
Thank you, man. I think, South Africa as a growing region kind of seems to fit into the middle of the global spectrum. If you've got Aussie wines on the one extreme and the French ones on the other, we seem to be kind of in the middle. But I find that since converting to organics and biodynamics, it's definitely had a sort of a cooling effect on the palate expression of the wines that we make. And I'm not quite sure what it is. I'm thinking or theorizing that, around the harvest time, it can be quite warm here in Stellenbosch. It can be, we work with centigrade. I'm not quite sure how many Fahrenheit it would be, but in terms of centigrade, it could be in the upper 30s. And you can imagine if the soil is bare and you go and walk on it, barefoot, for example, it could actually burn your feet. But if it's covered with plants, it's like a blanket you pull over the soil that really keeps the soil temperature down. And you also don't have that refraction, so that the microclimate in the bunchstone is also a lot cooler. And that kind of tends to steer the wines to a more European expression of the South African way, if I can call it that, than they were in the past, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, you certainly get that sense of that terroir-driven aspect towards the back of the palate, but on the nose and just on the initial, it has a ripe attack where there's freshness of fruit, there's vibrancy, energy with mineral tension, but then that freshness of fruit slowly turns its focus to that kind of mineral grip. And the one thing that I find really pleasing about this wine is it has a really balanced structure across the mid-palate. And talking to winemakers, that's probably one of the most overused term, because every winemaker thinks that their wine is balanced. Well, what does that mean? You can have Rieslings that are balanced with 7% alcohol, but screaming high acidity and sweetness. But you can also have Barolos that have high acidity, high tannins, high alcohol. Like, what does that all mean? And it sometimes I think if something doesn't necessarily just jump out of the glass, or like one massive flavor that dominates everything, you can have a balanced wine that way. Like if none of those things are really happening, and what this is really all of the flavors, all of the elements harmonizing together, hitting that chord, and it's beautiful. It's like a sonata, an aria.
Thanks, man. Cheers to that.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome.
So, in your early 20s, you started your journey into organics and biodynamics. Tell us why that was so important to you from the beginning.
Well, I think twofold. For one, my sort of journey in wine started in the vineyard. So America actually played an interesting role. I fell in love with a girl a year or two older than I was at the time.
Mm.
And I was still studying, and she finished a degree, and she got a job as an au pair in Pasadena and LA.
Okay.
And, love is a funny thing. And I upped and I left, and we spent a year traveling the States. And when I came back, my parents said, well, if you're big enough to do that, you're big enough to find a job and stand on your own feet. And I was keen to do so, but my hair had actually grown quite a bit in the US when I was there. And I looked a bit like Bob Marley. I had long dreadlocks.
Yeah,
And
awesome.
I couldn't get a job when I came back, and I got a job as a farm laborer.
Nice.
And it was wonderful. I was working outside in the vineyards and loving the nature and sunshine and everything else.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I was still studying as well, and I was doing a degree in environmental ethics. And from a US point of view, I would say your Aldo Leopold with his Sand County Almanac, and even Thoreau with Walden Pond.
Mhm.
I was reading, and if you read things in the night, it's hard to just forget them at daytime.
Right.
So with that sort of came the impetus to think about how I lived and how I farmed. And my experience as a farm laborer, if you're a worker, it's different. You can't really tell people what to do. You get told what to do. So I would be handed a can of whatever, and I had to spray it. And I just got to a point where I just didn't want to farm like that anymore.
Mhm.
So I set off, and I removed all the chemicals from the farm, and I failed dismally. I had weeds and pests and disease to such an extent that first harvest, my driver refused to drop off the grapes at the local cooperative. I had to drive them myself. They were so terrible.
Oh, no.
And I just got lucky, man. I met this elderly lady, and she came to the farm, and I just stood amongst the weeds, and I said to her, what do I do? How can I get rid of these things? I used to spray them. Do I now mow them or shovel them, or how do I remove them? And she said, no, you must stop. Your farm is a book. These weeds are letters in this book, and you need to learn to read again. And she took the whole day, and she explained to me that, they were there for a reason, and that I was actually farming with two things. In the short term, I was farming with grapes, but in the long run, I was kind of farming with soil. And if you think about it, in the short term, they're kind of at odds with each other. If you try and grow flowers or vegetables or something nice at home, the first thing you do is remove the weeds because they
Mhm.
compete for food and for moisture.
Right.
But if you go for a nice hike in nature or in wilderness, you never see bare soil. So for the soil to live, it needs to be covered by plants, and then the interaction between the plants and the life in the soil is key for the soil to survive and to improve. So they seem to be at odds initially, but in time, a funny thing happens. As you improve your soil and your humus levels improve or increase, so does the resilience and the resistance of the plants that live there. So the longer you stick with it, the easier it actually becomes to farm organically, and the system starts, looking after itself. So that was, to me, fascinating. I loved it. It felt right. I could sleep at night, and it was so interesting. It was like a whole new world of discovery that I had to re-educate myself and start farming with nature and not against it. So that was kind of the beginning. It was very innocent, if I can put it that way. And I did not know that this lady was actually the doyen of biodynamics in South Africa. I'd never heard the word, had no idea what it meant. And after I'd been farming organically for 2 or 3 years, she said to me, you should become a biodynamic farmer.
Mhm.
And I said, yeah, I'm up for it. What does it mean? And it was a very easy entry. She said, if organics is about being sustainable, biodynamics is about being self-sufficient. So essentially what you do is you have multiple organic systems on the farm that feed off each other to create a sort of a self-sufficient whole. And I liked that, and I thought that was really nice. And then I slowly but surely got introduced to the biodynamic preparations and all the weird and wonderful voodoo things of viticulture.
Horns, all sorts of worms and stuff. Yeah.
Keep an open mind, and if it works, use it, and if it doesn't, think twice. Maybe don't.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. It's I like what you said about the organic farming of removing the weeds to grow the roses, and doing so, it becomes easier and easier. I once had, I was once speaking to someone about how that parlays into regular life, like what that actually means, and someone broke it down where they said it's kind of like waxing. If you wax, your legs or your chest or your brows or whatever, the more you wax, the more you start to kind of hurt the one specific cell that grows the hair. It becomes easier to wax after that. So you're basically creating a positive outcome from doing a certain methodology, and you're telling the plants where they need to grow, and from there you're keeping everything clean and pristine, and allowing nature to take its course. It's really, really interesting because biodynamics. There's still a lot of people that think it's all magic. It's smoke and mirrors. But I've tried literally a wine from the same vintage, same vineyard, where across the way there's like this vineyard was completely biodynamic, and this vineyard had what we were spraying. So same farmed exactly the same way as far as irrigation, but one was biodynamic, one was sprayed, and there is a difference that you can actually tell. It ends up in the glass. Biodynamic is especially interesting because it's that step further beyond organic farming, where it's actually benefiting the earth as well, where that's something as people, as humans, we should really start to pay attention, because there's no more earth currently, and once we have polluted it, it's going to be really hard to kickstart and bring it back to where it is. So if we can find a symbiosis between the earth and living sustainably, that is ultimately the best situation possible. And if somehow the world can figure out how to make this, doing all that, we're in a great spot. I'll tell you what.
But it's a funny thing. I always say to people that waste is a cultural concept. It's not a natural one.
Exactly.
If you go outside, and anything that dies gives life to something else. Every time a leaf drops from the vineyard or from a tree, it's eaten by an insect or a worm and turned into compost and goes back into that cycle of life. And all of nature works like this, except us. Every morning for breakfast, every time we have lunch, every time we have dinner, we create waste. Every time we eat stuff and we drink stuff, we chuck stuff away. And it's economically doesn't make sense, and ecologically it doesn't make sense either. And this is where I really love the biodynamic model, because even if you think of an organic farm, if I farmed organically with grapes, I would still create waste, because I might just do wild yeast ferments and everything else, but I'll have a mountain of pips and stems and skins outside the cellar at the end of harvest. So what do I do with that stuff? If I drive over the hill and I go and chuck it somewhere, I'm going to acidify the soil and stuff it up. So I've got waste. I have to pay someone to come and fetch it. The other hand is, if I farm organically with cows, I also have a lot of waste, because with their manure and this stuff, the nitrogen levels can become excessive. But the moment I farm with both, which is the biodynamic way, they start feeding off each other. You take the waste from the cellar and you feed it to the cows, and you take the waste from the cows and you feed it to the vineyards.
Right.
And the problem goes. So to me, that is the most beautiful thing about biodynamics, the most obvious benefit of it. And Rudolf Steiner himself referred to it when he spoke about a farm. He said the farm must be seen as an individuality. It must be a self-sufficient system that's relying on as little external inputs as possible. And you know where I live on the southern tip of Africa. My currency sucks. It's useless. I don't know. It's like 20 to the dollar or whatever. It's up and down every day. I don't even know anymore. And if you look at big ag or big agriculture, they're not really interested in South African rands. They want US dollars or euros or pounds. And with inflation, our currency slips every year. So for the third world farmer, it becomes more and more expensive just to have some skin in the game. And a methodology like biodynamics can be hugely emancipating in this way. You know, it can free you from this dependency. I just go and collect my cow's manure. It costs the same every Friday, make my own compost. So that's the one part. And then if you get to the scary parts and the voodoo parts, and you're looking at the biodynamic preps, you know, I was also highly skeptical, and I think it's important that people remain highly skeptical. I think the moment you dogmatically accept anything, it's a mistake and the beginning of the end. And what happened with me is that this lady said she wanted to apply some preparation 500 on the farm. And I said, okay, let's do it. What is it? And she said, no, you got to take some cow manure and stuff it in cow horns, and then you have to bury it in the soil and stir it and spread it. And I listened to this stuff and I was like, you know, it sounds awesome, but I'm gonna actually go surfing if I may, because I'm working really hard, and I'm not gonna go stuff horns in the soil and you know, I just want to go to the beach. And she was so cool. She said, go, have fun, but let me do it. And she did it in a few rows of block 13, the Syrah block. Mm-hmm. And within 6 months, it blew my mind. The rows where she did it became darker in color, became so soft. It was like I was walking on my bed on my mattress. Yeah. And the other rows were...
The leaves were darker in color, yes?
No, the soil was becoming really dark in color.
Gotcha, okay.
And really soft. So it was like you walk on your mattress or on your bed, as opposed to the rest of the vineyard, which was rock hard in the middle of summer. Mm-hmm. So it worked. And why it works, I think we can talk about for days. But there's a sort of an old school, new school vibe going on. And if you're going to speak to Nicolas Joly, you're going to get proper old school, sure, very esoteric, which is wonderful. And then you speak to, I don't know, maybe Vanya Cullen or somebody from New World, and they'll use the same preparation, but maybe look at it from a more microbial point of view, as opposed to and less of an esoteric one. Yeah. Regardless, you know, I think there's such a diversity of people on the planet. Some of us are more scientific, some of us are more spiritual. It's a good thing, man.
For sure.
Yeah. What works for you? Those are hair back.
Right. One of the odd things that I learned about biodynamics and the planting days, the watering days, the harvesting days, I thought it was just like, you know, paint by numbers. It's like, oh, it's been 7 days since then. And then like, no, but when looking at the specific days, it has to do with the celestial bodies. Like, so there are certain days that you water because there will be a full moon overhead. And when you water, and this has been scientifically proven, that a water molecule with the oxygen and 2 hydrogen atoms, when the moon is overhead, the lattice for the structure of the water molecule actually shifts just by, like, I think it's like 3 degrees, allowing for the water molecule to actually be technically smaller, not as wide. So it actually goes through the veins quicker. So there is a little bit of science that actually agrees with biodynamic farming, and I come from a scientific background, so I knowing this and like looking at the covalent bonds and all this stuff, I figured, you know, this is actually far more interesting than I thought it was. And they started studying it and realized it's truly remarkable. You can go down the rabbit hole for sure with biodynamics, but there's something to be said about it. There's something to be said about closing the loop. As you said, like, we humans, we continually create waste. What would it be like? What would the world be like if we just close that loop and we're able to just continually use waste to live in harmony with the world and basically have better crops because of it, better products because of it, and not be poisoning the planet, poisoning groundwater, having healthier plants, giving us fresher oxygen, all these different things. It really, really makes sense. I want to read something because when we last spoke on your farm, you said something that I wrote down, and it really caught me as important. You once said that with knowledge comes obligation. One of the lasting points that stayed with me was that the last thing you want to do is to protect your knowledge of organics and biodynamics, and then have your neighbor basically be spraying pesticides. So your philosophy is to freely share at no cost to achieve your goals and ultimately spread the gospel of organics and biodynamic farming. This circumstance has led you to develop a number of study groups, which has allowed you to identify key farmers and partners to work with. What ultimately is your end goal for sharing your knowledge?
Well, it's a big question. It's a good question. I think, to be honest, it starts with, why do I farm organically and biodynamically in the first place? And I answered that question when we started this interview. I think I'm sort of motivated ethically because I believe it's the right thing to do. And so it's not a marketing decision. It's not a financial decision. It's just, this is my life. I've got one life, and I really want to live it to the best of my ability. And that involves more than being successful or making money or whatever. It must be meaningful. But it's not just an abstract philosophical thing. It's very real. I'm living in a vineyard. And I was quite shocked initially because I had this romantic notion that the countryside was this wholesome place with flowers and plants and bees and birds and things. Yeah. But there's an incredible amount of spraying and stuff that was going on in the countryside, and the birds and the bees and the flowers and the people who live there suffer as a consequence. So I've got two young daughters, Isabella and Tallulah, and they grew up on this farm. And I know, something like spray drift is a very real issue. Every year, for example, I have to sell off some of the grapes that I've been farming biodynamically for 20 years as conventional because of spray drift. And this is despite planting hedges or rows of trees or whatever. So for my own sake, for my daughter's sake, for my neighbor's sake, but also for the planet's sake, there's this environmental slogan that you must think global and you must act local. And I think we're all worried, it's crazy times. It's political upheaval and economic upheaval and global warming. Everyone is freaked out and kind of at a loss at what to do. And what you can do is you can be aware of this and not become paralyzed by it, but in your small life or sphere of influence, try and make a difference. So these all kind of influence in how I feel and how I want to live here. So it's not as if I'm competing and there's a glut of organic and biodynamic wine in the market and I'm fighting for market share. If anything, there's not enough. We can't have enough grapes. We can't source enough grapes. And we just started sharing with everyone. And I would say there are a couple of groups. There's sort of the old guys that have been coming along now for 20 years, and I've learned probably more from them than they've learned from me. We brainstorm, we'd go to each other's vineyards and how do you manage the weeds and how do you do this and how do you do that? And, then everyone doesn't have to reinvent the wheel and you can learn a lot from it. But an interesting switch happened, and that is that the the consumer came on board. In the old days, organics wasn't so cool. It was cool in Sweden, but that's because the government had an influence, and they did in Norway as well. And X percentage had to be organically grown. But most markets were just driven by profit or what people wanted, and farmers can't be production driven anymore. They need to be market driven. So the market started dictating it, and people came to the farm and said, "But how do you do it?" And I just thought, wonderful. The more the merrier. Let's all do it. But with that, it's kind of funny. They say never a good deed goes unpunished. And, one thing I always say to people is, obviously, I'm passionate and I'm a believer, and I can be quite enthusiastic in bringing the message across. But to be fair, is people must realize that true sustainability it's a three-legged chair. You need to look after nature.
Sure.
But you also need to look after people, and you need to look after money. And if you look, you can almost exploit nature the longest and get away with it, and then people, and then money. But if you run out of money, the chair falls over immediately.
Yeah.
So I feel wary of infusing people going, go, 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 and then, fools rush where angels fear to tread, and they storm off and convert the entire vineyard, and it doesn't work. They lose money. So, I always say to people, it's a no-brainer. I mean, we've actually been farming like this for 6,000 years. We've only become chemical dependent over the last 100 or so.
Yeah.
But we have to re-educate ourselves. We have to heal our soils because they've been seriously destroyed over the last couple of decades.
Sure.
And just ease into it, start with a small portion, figure it out, and then one can roll it out quite quickly. So we started with 1/4 of a hectare for 3 years, and then jumped to 20, 40, 80, and now 120. So one can roll it out when you sort of get the hang of it. Yeah.
So speaking about sharing your knowledge, talking about, being good to people, talking about the importance of money, you have the Cornerstone Project. So what you're doing with this project, in my belief, is really the step in the right direction for South Africa. Even today in 2020, there are still, socioeconomical hurdles that still exist within the modern day constraint, which, it unfortunately seems, terrible to think about, but, life is what it is, and there still are people that have certain mentalities towards other people. When you first began the Cornerstone Project, what did you set out to do, and how has it evolved since? And I suppose for those who don't know what the Cornerstone Project is, can you kind of quickly describe that and talk about how it's evolved since then?
Okay, so it was a really it was interesting. So I mentioned to you that I started working as a farm laborer, and it's hard work, man. I tell you. A lot of respect for people who do manual labor and vineyards and stuff. It's really literally backbreaking work, and it's hot and it's cold and it's sunny and it's windy and it's raining. And I was young. I was in my 20s and full of energy and loving the outdoors. But some of the people I was working with in the vineyards were old enough to be my parents. And one day in August, which is our coldest month, and for you in the middle of summer, it's for us in the middle of winter, it really was so cold that when it was time to go and have our breakfast break, I couldn't work anymore. So I went and I grabbed a wetsuit. I'm a keen surfer.
Yeah.
And I put my wetsuit on, and then I put my work clothes over my wetsuit, and I went back to the vineyard to work. And I had a sort of a good laugh, and I looked at my colleagues, and I thought it was a cool thing to do. But then I realized, these guys did not have access to wetsuits that they could wear or that they could put on. And all they did is they basically took some newspaper and shoved it down their pants and their shirts and their shoes to try and keep warm. And then I thought that actually really sucked just to call it by its name. I mean, wine is a beautiful product. This Cabernet that we enjoying tonight probably retails for around about $70 or thereabout. You know, how can this amazing thing be built on the back of people who get very little recognition and very little reward for it? And I wanted to, it like going organic, I just felt this is not right, you know, this is not how I want to live. So I said to my colleagues, let's make wine. It's the only way we're going to get out of this hole, because if we have to keep on selling grapes, we weren't making enough. We'll have to start our own brand and dig our way out. And we then invited the bank manager to come and lend us a couple of $1,000,000. And this dude had a good laugh. He thought we were crazy. He said, no, man, rich people enter this industry and they lose a fortune. Now, you with a degree in philosophy and funny hair and a bunch of illiterate vineyard workers want to borrow millions to start your own business. So this didn't fly. Well, for the workers, but for me it did. I was like, if we put our heads down and we focus and we commit, we'll pull it off. But my colleagues declined. It was a bridge too far. The man from the bank said to them, you know, chances of success are virtually zero. And it was heartbreaking. And I actually read a Indian philosopher's work that night, a guy called Amartya Sen. And he had the PPE chair in Oxford. And he said, if you want to empower people, it's about the capability to choose. If you take somebody's choice away in life, you disempower them. So just give people a choice. And that's what I did. And then they opted for housing and education for their kids and, you know, pension or retirement annuities, all the things that we take for granted that they didn't have, let alone a bicycle or a mobile phone or whatever. So that is the Cornerstone Project. And it's not called Cornerstone in the US because of the Cornerstone Winery. So it's called Capstone. Yeah. So it's called Capstone in the States. But it's not only the proceeds from that wine. I mean, obviously, we don't sell enough of it. So a bit of love from all of the wines. But I dig it, man. I don't know if you've read that book, Life of Pi, with a tiger and the boat and everything else. So it's not in the movie, but it's in the book. And when that kid walks to school every morning, he walks through that arch. And the arch says, Nil magnum nisi bonum. There can be no greatness without goodness.
Sure.
And I subscribe to that. And I think, I read an article last night on Twitter, another platform. And they asked a famous US astronaut, I can't remember his name, but he's been sort of quite an environmental activist. What does he have to say? And he basically just apologized to the youth and said, we really stuffed up the planet. And I was just thinking he's right, but we're not dead yet. So let's fix what we can while we can and see what we can do and see if we can make it a better place for future generations. Anthony, there's this crazy thing, man. I don't know if you remember when you visited me, but in the office, I have this, in the tasting room, those old Acheulean hand axes.
Yeah.
So, I'm 49. If you go biblical times, you go maybe as far as 2,000 years. If you go to the Greeks, Plato and Socrates and those cats, that's another 300 years before that. Mm-hmm. But then if you look at those Acheulean hand axes, they've been lying on this farm for 250,000 years. Mm-hmm. So axes have been living here forever. And it's almost like, I'm like my real significance is like a little speck of dust on the road between here and Cape Town, if you look at the bigger picture. So sure. It just changes the way you think. This is not really my farm or my business or whatever. It's a place of opportunity. It's a gift. It's a luck to be here and to be a part of this thing happening and the dream and to work with all these wonderful people. And I just want to live more along those lines than, I don't know, what we were told. Yeah, whatever. I don't know.
I think you have the right idea. I mean, not just as a business person, but as a considerate human being. So, good on
Yeah.
you.
Cheers to that, man.
So I know that Instagram only gives us a little bit of time before they kind of shut down the video. So I've got just a few more questions for you. Where do you ultimately see your brand in 20 years' time?
Oh, I lie awake at night thinking about this. You know, I've got an amazing guy who works in our vineyards. Well, he doesn't work in our vineyards. He basically runs them. He's a better farmer than I am. His name is Ishan. And I spoke to him about it today. And I said to him, you know, this farm, exactly that. It must become a place of opportunity. So it's not a commodity. It's not something to buy and sell. It's not something that I want to control or dominate for as long as I can possibly do and sort of cling on to it. I think I was given amazing advice by a Dutch friend, a lady called Dagmar, when I was young. And she said, you must surround yourself with people who are better than you. And I think I've done that. And now I think, you know, Nushka makes better wine than I used to. Ishan is a better farmer. Daniel is better with logistics. Lizzie rocks with the admin and the finance and the stuff. And I'm almost like a weed, man. I was here first. But now all these beautiful plants are starting to grow around me on the farm, and yeah, I think I must head off to that cabin in the mountain or that cabin by the beach, and go and read a bit more and maybe write something, and leave it in the hands of these people who are more capable than I could ever be, and they're doing a wonderful job. I mean, if you taste this wine, to be truthfully honest, you know, I've got very little to do with this. Ishan grew it. Nushka made it. Dan did the labels and the bottles and the everything. And now I get to catch the shine for it. But it's just because I was here first. But these people actually did all of this stuff. So kudos to them. And I hope the farm can look after them and they can look after the farm. And when they move on, hopefully there are other nice people that want to live here and make it a better place. And I'm up for that. Yeah.
This is just the side project while you go and surf. That's
Anyway.
right? Awesome. So there was one more question I had for you. I just remembered something that a question I had for you when I was there tasting with you. You had poured the reserve white, and I was looking at it and tasting it. It's like, wow, this tastes exactly like Sauvignon Blanc. Like, this is Sauvignon Blanc. And I started looking at it. It's like, it says Sauvignon Blanc nowhere on the bottle, nowhere on the front, nor on the back. Have you changed maybe on the back labels to say like, this is, you know, Sauvignon Blanc that's organic or biodynamic, made blah, 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 blah? Because I remember it's just reserve white. And it's like, what does that mean? Reserve white. Like,
yeah, look, we're still fine-tuning, sharpening the pencil.
right. Awesome.
We'll get there.
Cool.
But I've got an amazing story to tell you about that wine, if
Cool.
I may. You know, I don't know if we run out of time, but
you can keep it to like 2 minutes if you can.
fuck, I'm going to do my best.
Right.
Okay, so the vineyard is right in front of the house here. And it was planted in 94. And we made one wine from that vineyard, always. And we went organic and biodynamic. And then the grapes started tasting different in different parts of the vineyard. So we started picking the same vineyard twice. First for the biodynamic Sauvignon Blanc, and the second time, typically a week later, for the reserve white. So, and those two are completely different. Amazing. So I always thought that the difference was because of microclimatic conditions. The reserve typically comes from the more vigorous part of the block, and then the biodynamic Sauvignon Blanc comes from the less vigorous part of the block. So I figured less vigor, more sunshine, pick earlier, riper fruit, more vigor, less sunshine, pick later, more linear or linearity or whatever, you know. And Then a prof from the University of Stellenbosch, Professor Florian Bauer, um, I had a chat to him about it, and he planted the seed of microbial terroir in my mind. And it's a very interesting thing. There's virtually no research. I know University of California, Davis did a very short study in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that Chances Robertson mentioned the word at a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc symposium once. But what it boils down to is your gut microbiome does not only digest your food, it influences how you feel. And science can prove specific correlations between thoughts and feeling, and even things like depression and what lives in your stomach.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, if it's like that with people, can it be like that with plants? Can the life in the soil influence how the vine feels and how it grows and how the grapes taste and the wine that comes from it? So I don't know. Science will have to figure this out. But if that is the case, it's radical, because if you think the beauty of wine is terroir, that sets it apart from Coca-Cola. I mean, it's not made, it's got a sense of place. You speak to any winemaker and you ask them, what is terroir? They're going to talk about rain and aspect and slope, but they will always talk about soil.
Yeah.
And you ask them, tell me about your soil, they're going to have a physical explanation. So I'm going to say, sand is going to give me fruit, or granite is going to give me minerality or structure or whatever. And then the next step would be maybe a chemical understanding of the soil, the pH and stuff. But we have very little understanding of the biological nature of the soil and how that influences the wines that we drink. And I think it's like, that's where we need to go, man. Because if we can look after nature and make beautiful wine doing so,
That's it.
then I mean, I'm a believer. So I hope that's the case. And, I hope some clever scientists can prove it for us.
I think you're onto something that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's funny, like just the way 2020 is going. Like, you know, if we get to 2021, I'm sure there's probably a zombie apocalypse, an alien invasion, and an asteroid strike in our futures. Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
You know, Nietzsche said, out of chaos erupts the dancing star. So you need a bit of chaos for creativity to flow. So 2020 sucks, but something will come from it. Just give it time.
I believe it. We just do. This is the moment to give us tremendous pause, to take a stop and look around and figure out how we can fix this and move forward to be better. So,
yeah.
Johan, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day and staying up with us tonight. Before we go, do you have any parting thoughts or last words that you'd like to leave us with?
Man, I would actually just say I would love to see you in person rather than on Instagram Live.
For sure.
So hang in there. These are crazy times. But just know this, our door is open for all of you. And if you can come and visit, please do. I'd love nothing more. Cheers to that. And thanks for this opportunity, Anthony, man. Wow. It's awesome, man. Thank you for yeah. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah. As I said, you know, keep making this great wine and keep being you. You should totally write a book about what you learned, because I'm sure there would be, you know, hundreds of thousands of people that would want to get inside your brain and understand what you've learned from doing what you've done for so long. So thank you so much, man. Again. It's been awesome. Been fantastic. Great chatting. Till next week, keep it locked here. Another chat begins 1 p.m. Until then, stay safe, drink well, and be kind to others. Cheers. Have a lucky night.